Alexandra, you are the founder of Just the Inserts, a platform dedicated to empowering individuals with accessible, transparent information about medical choices. Alexandra, you're joining me now from the other side of the world, and I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I love when I have interviews where people are genuinely excited for me to come on. It's, never really know where people are in your journey, so I feel very welcome here. Thank you so much.
I have been fangirling you hard from across the world for probably 3 years now. So it's a huge pleasure to actually be able to meet you in person, in online person. So, Alexandra, for those who don't know you, what led you to just the inserts and what inspired you to want to become more informed about vaccines?
Well, like many people that spend any time doing anything, it's my own personal story. I had just some pharmaceutical adverse reactions when I was active duty military for a little while, but it wasn't really until I was pregnant with my first child. I have 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And for my first child, I was researching everything. I was researching just all the different types of things that you need for a new mom, like the bassinet and what bottle to get and what laundry detergent to use and all these different things and what nursing bra. And I never really thought about the medical products that I needed to be researching. And it wasn't until I was offered the Tdap vaccine when I was pregnant in my third trimester, which is the vaccine to prevent tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. And the main reason why it's given to pregnant women is that pertussis piece, which is also known as whooping cough. And I just remember thinking, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I can't have some other medications. I can't have raw fish. I can't have all these other things. Why would I be able, like, I wasn't against him. It just didn't resonate with me 100%. So I asked my mom to research it for me because I had research fatigue. And when she came back a few days later with all of her research, it was so polarizing and it was so aggressive that I just mentally could not process what she was providing to me. And I went on social media and typed in vaccines, and it was so aggressive, whether pro or anti, and it really turned me off to the conversation. And I just saw logical fallacies and really fear-based mentalities from all angles of the discussion, and there was really no safe space to just ask open and honest questions. And I would even ask some of my friends that were a little bit ahead of me that had kids before me, and I would ask them, and then they would physically get uncomfortable just by me asking. And I just realized that this was a really hot topic, but nobody was really talking about it in a very productive manner. And so, me being myself, I knew that there was some kind of I have a business background, so I knew there had to be some kind of manufacturer's guidance, or when you get any product on the market, at least in America, typically there's going to be some little pamphlet or sheet of paper that provides all the legal disclaimers from that company about that product. Like, you get a new hair dryer, you get a new espresso machine, or anything like that, there's going to be manufacturer guidance for it. And hey, don't plug this in near water. Hey, if a wire is sparking, don't use it. Like, this could cause harm to you or to the product or your home. And so I knew that there had to be some kind of documentation there. And it was really hard to find, but I ended up finding it, and they're called manufacturer inserts. And I realized that the FDA has regulated manufacturers, all pharmaceutical products, at least in the United States, for prescription and vaccines and biologics. So those are like blood products. And then for some over the counters as well, there are some manufacturer inserts. They require all manufacturers to do this in those categories, and it breaks down very simply. It can be really overwhelming at first, but once you understand the structure of an insert, it's actually very well done. And it communicates to you, the consumer, the things that you need to know about that product before you accept it. And then when you accept it, certain things that you should be aware of. So if you do end up accepting it, that you're aware of early warning signals of a potential adverse reaction, you're aware of certain registries that they might have for you to communicate to the manufacturer and to the government if you've experienced that adverse reaction. And so the inserts are just really important. They were meant to be read, and once I discovered the inserts, I could not believe that it wasn't common knowledge, that it wasn't an automatic thing that every single person got before they accepted a product. And I couldn't really understand why healthcare providers weren't communicating these to their patients. And so I started digging and digging and digging, and I shared it within my circle of influence, and I got a lot of pushback and a lot of hate just for sharing .gov information from the manufacturers, from our government. And I started digging into the industry, and I started digging into all these other aspects that you kind of have to understand in order to understand the black and white words on the insert. There is some historical context that you need to be aware of, some legislation, at least in the United States, of why manufacturers aren't held liable for some of their products. And so I started sharing all of this, and I created an account for just the inserts, and it just blew up. I have so many parents that are like me that value this resource, but I wasn't really prepared for how many medical professionals have reached out to me, and even people within the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They were reaching out to me and saying, I was never taught this. I'm an infectious disease scientist, and I didn't even know this about this vaccine on this insert or things like that. So we're going on 6 years now that I've been doing this, and it's been such an incredible experience. I've learned so much, and just really trying to shift the culture to be one that values informed consent for everyone, whether you accept, delay, or decline any or all medical products.
You talk about accepting, delaying, and declining. So, what does it mean to delay?
So delaying is typically, well, for any product, but it's your provider has given you a diagnosis based on whatever you present to them, saying, I've had a fever for 7 days and I have, like some other symptoms. You provide that to them. They give you a diagnosis based on their expert experience or maybe some physical exams or things like that. And then after they provide the diagnosis, they recommend some treatments, whether that be products, procedures, lifestyle changes, things like that. And then for products, if they recommend that product to you, you have the option to delay it. You don't have to accept it, and you don't have to decline it right then and there. You might accept it in the future, but you just want to research more about it. Maybe you want some more diagnostic testing. Maybe you want some labs done. Maybe you want to go to a specialist or a second opinion, or maybe you want to research different manufacturers for that product, especially for vaccines. There in America, there's different manufacturers for each vaccine. So maybe you want to find one that resonates a little bit better with you, or maybe the ingredients, it doesn't have one of the ingredients that violates your religious or moral standards. And so that delay option just gives you time. You're not making a decision, yes or no. You're just saying not yet.
I think that's a really important one for people to be aware of, because we live in such a black and white world, hey, where it's like we all believe, and I think a lot of people want to hear, like, is like the vegan or carnivore, or is it anti or pro, but there is such middle ground. And I try to talk about this with my community as much as possible. That's just like, just sit with it. You don't have to rush to the decision. Just there's no rush, especially when you've only just had a baby and they're recommending the vaccines as soon as the baby's born. So giving that extra time, you don't have to make a decision then and there. You can always go home and bring the baby back if you choose to. I actually only just recently was at my mum's house, and she handed me my childhood vaccine booklet, and I had a flick through it, and I counted a total of 11 vaccines that I received from birth till high school. The book didn't include the HPV and the tetanus that I did receive in high school also. But today, the Australian government's national immunisation program schedules around 64 doses from birth through to year 10, and even more if you're an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander child. So from your research, there's an incredible increase in vaccines on the childhood immunisation schedule. From what you have seen, is there a link and a correlation between all the diseases and illnesses that we now have in our children in this society?
That's a really great question, and I'm not 100% sure about Australia. I'm not as intimate with how Australia legislation works. However, for the United States, and I have a feeling just based on the small Australian audience that I do have, and then I have people in the UK and Canada that kind of say the same thing. For America, what happened in 1986, there was legislation that was passed, and it removed liability from vaccine manufacturers. And after that happened, the vaccine schedule boomed. And so same in America. It was a very small amount of vaccines that were given, and they were all given in the effort of eradicating a disease. However, once that legislation came forth, the term effectiveness was altered. And so a vaccine doesn't necessarily, there are several vaccines on the market that don't necessarily stop transmission or stop the transfer of a disease or anything like that. They just suppress symptoms. And so the entire vaccine industry just completely changed. What was considered effective before. That definition changed. The way that somebody would receive compensation for serious injury or death changed. They no longer can sue a manufacturer. They have to go through the federal government. On every single vaccine that's administered in the United States, there's a tax on. So for every single disease that is prevented, it's a 75-cent tax for every single vaccine. So if you're getting the trivalent flu vaccine, that's only 75 cents per dose. But if you're getting MMR or Tdap or something like that, then it's $2.25. And so I don't think most people realize those that accept the vaccines are actually paying a tax that goes to a government fund to pay for vaccine injury and death. So the manufacturers do not pay that. And that's not, I mean, it's common sense, right? As a business person, if you're not held liable, you don't have those incentives to make a safe and effective product, or maybe you can redefine the term safe and effective, then that's going to be a wonderful option for profit and for growing that industry. And there's not a lot of guardrails, unfortunately. And I hope that will change soon. I think that manufacturers should be liable for all the products on the market. And there are some people that will come at me and say, well, they have to be immune to liability because if they were sued for a serious injury or death, then they would no longer be profitable. However, that logic is incredibly flawed, because if you look at other products on the market, prescription pharmaceuticals, for example, there are many of them in the inserts that have equal or more dangerous or fatal adverse reactions listed on their inserts, and yet they can still turn a profit on those products, and they're still dealing with lawsuits, but they're still turning a profit. So that doesn't really float very well. So I personally think that the first thing that we need to do for our entire culture is to repeal that legislation, 1986, so manufacturers are held liable for all of their products. I think a lot of things would fall into place in making sure that they do prioritize the public's definition of safe and effective, not the manufacturer's definition of safe and effective. And then after that, I believe that mandates, at least in the United States, are state-based. There's not a federal mandate, but there is different states. And I don't think that personally here, this is my personal opinion, that a government should have the authority to decide what you accept, delay, and decline. I believe that's a personal responsibility and a personal authority. And so I would also like to see the mandates go away, because being withheld educational or employment opportunities based on your decision to accept, delay, or decline a medical product, to me, is medical coercion and not informed consent. In order to have informed consent, you need to have the ability to make one of those three decisions. And if you're being coerced through education or employment, that's medical coercion, in my opinion.
100%. And we've seen this through COVID. This has been the best thing that's happened since COVID. A lot of people are waking up to that coercion that we do have in society now. So is there a specific vaccine ingredient that most people would be shocked if they actually read on the insert?
There's a few. At the top of my head, aluminum is one that I focus pretty heavily on, mainly because of the National Institutes of Health. They have a section on their website that talks about the environmental exposure of aluminum for a pregnant woman could lead, and I'm not saying 100% here, this is the NIH has said that there could be some potential causation for a woman that receives a product with some kind of environmental exposure could lead to a subsequent autism diagnosis in her child. I personally think there needs to be a lot more research for that, and this is something that I cover in my book. I go a lot more in depth in like the research of it, because some people will say, well, it's not actual aluminum in vaccines, it's aluminum salt. However, I provide a study of aluminum salts in rabbits and how it was found to be collecting in different organs of the rabbit. So we know that it doesn't just stay where you've injected it, it can go to other organs. We know that it can cause a lot of different things, especially if someone does have that autism diagnosis. I provided a study and I cited it of those that had severe autism. And I'm talking about severe autism here, like the nonverbal, will always live with their parents for the rest of their lives, that type of autism. And they found high levels of aluminum in their brain. So it's just really important, in my opinion, for a parent to be aware of this. This is all cited in my book, and I would say 99.9% of it is from .gov resources, at least in America. And so if you're going to be accepting the Tdap vaccine, which has aluminum in it, that's an ingredient that I would be pretty concerned about. And there are plenty of the, at least for America, the pediatric vaccines that are given within the first year of life also have aluminum in it. If you have religious or moral standards, whether you're Muslim, Orthodox, Jewish, Christian, or you just, have a standard of not accepting any product that has human DNA in it or animal DNA in it, it's important to understand that there are plenty of the products on the market that do have, it's called manufacturing residue of DNA. And I cite how to find that in my training course, and in my book I provide step-by-step instructions on how to find that out for yourself for each product. So those are ingredients that definitely you want to be aware of for religious reasons, moral reasons, and also most of the vaccines on the market, there's a section called 13.1, and it states that it has not been tested or evaluated for mutagenic, carcinogenic, and impairment of fertility issues. And so that's another thing we see with our current cancer rates, our current infertility rates. And I'm not saying 100%, yes, there's correlation or causation, but there is some kind of correlation there and we need to research it.
You recently spoke about shedding on one of your recent podcast episodes. What does shedding mean?
So traditionally speaking, shedding is associated with live vaccines. So, well, let me step back a second. Shedding can be a vaccine strain or it can be a natural strain. So that's basically whenever you have some kind of a virus, you can shed it through sneezing, through aerosols in your breath. Some diseases or viruses are spread through fecal matter, or it can be like not washing your hands after you go to the bathroom or something like that. And so shedding can be natural, the natural virus, the wild type virus. And then shedding can also be for the live virus vaccine. So that's like MMR, the oral polio, chickenpox, shingles. Actually, I think we have phased out the live shingles one, but it was in the past. And then, the flu mist is also a live vaccine. So for those vaccines, they state on their manufacturer inserts that they have the potential, if somebody is vaccinated, to shed whatever route that it normally sheds through. And it typically will say in the manufacturer insert which route it is. It will shed the vaccine strain of the virus. And typically it's altered by science. So it just depends on which one you're talking about, on how it might interact. So for example, for the oral polio vaccine, it would cause actually more severe, and it would happen more often, a paralytic poliomyelitis than the wild strain. And then the World Health Organization actually pulled an inactivated measles vaccine, I believe, I can't remember, I think it was in the 90s or maybe in the 2000s, of this inactivated measles vaccine would actually cause a more aggressive infection of measles when the vaccinated person was exposed to that. That typically isn't considered shedding, but more like breakthrough infection. When we're talking about shedding, most people will say that's only live vaccines. However, in my opinion, as a layperson, if somebody is accepting a vaccine and then they are still getting that disease, which is typically either called breakthrough infections or secondary infections, and then they are transmitting that vaccine virus or aggressive form because it's mutated based on your vaccination, that to me is a shedding-like event. And so shedding, typically, scientific medical community at large will refer to only live vaccines. However, there are shedding-like events as a layperson that we would consider, okay, if somebody is going to be vaccinated with the Tdap vaccine, according to the manufacturer insert and the studies that have been done post-marketing, we know that somebody might have the pertussis, they might be shedding pertussis, but because they're vaccinated, their symptoms have been suppressed, and so they don't have any symptoms to alert them to stay home, and now they're shedding pertussis because they don't realize that they have it in their system. So that's something to be aware of, especially when we're talking about going into highly populated areas and going to areas like daycare or school, when we know, in the summer, at least in America, most of the kids are trying to catch up to all their vaccinations because they have their annual school physical before the school starts. And so that's definitely a high time for shedding that we see in the States.
So, from a mother to a mother, for those who have declined vaccines after doing their own research and found that's best for their family, how can we then go on to protect our kids from shedding if they're going to be around other kids that may be on the schedule?
That is such a good question. And when I first read about shedding, I remember reading the rotavirus vaccine insert, and they actually talk about peak shedding windows of when a child that was vaccinated with rotavirus, because those are oral drops in the mouth. And I remember reading it and thinking, just having an anxiety attack, thinking, oh my gosh, my baby, whether your baby's vaccinated or not, they're still going to be exposed to other, children that will be accepting this product, and they'll be shedding it through their diaper. So I remember just having this anxiety attack and thinking, okay, we need to be in a bubble, we need to do this, we need to do that. And that can be actually, that hyper awareness, that hyper vigilance can actually be more toxic, and it can lower your immune response and make you more susceptible to not being able to fight off that if you were shed upon. So I've come to the realization that shedding is going to happen no matter what. There are going to be people that accept these products. I cannot control their decisions, and I respect informed consent for everybody to have that option to accept, delay, or decline. So I can't control it. I know I can't control it. And so what can I do for my own family to ensure that whenever my kids are exposed to, and myself are exposed to somebody else shedding a vaccine strain, what can I do to help their immune systems and their natural detox systems to be able to handle that? And so we focus on the basics. We focus on sleep. We focus on nutritious food. We focus on lowering our stress burden. We have a very simplified schedule. In my area, at least where I live right outside of Washington, D.C. Everybody's life is so hectic and so stressful, and you get in a car and everybody's mad at each other. And so I just have realized, okay, I don't want to fill our schedule up from things that we are constantly running from one thing to the next and trying to navigate all these different activities. And so we just have a very simplified schedule, and the things that we want to prioritize in that season of life, and we make sure that whatever we do, we actually have joy doing it. If we're dreading it, you're gonna be stressed out. Your stress affects all of this. Stress is so integral to your immune system and all these other things. And so I know it sounds like maybe kind of a cop-out answer, but it's so true. It's exactly what you need to be doing, whether you're fighting off natural disease or vaccine strain viruses. I think I recently did a reel about a toxologist that I was talking with, and we have this whole podcast episode on how we can just live healthier lives instead of obsessing about who's shedding onto who and trying to control that situation, because we just can't control what we're being shed on, but we can control making sure that our kids are sweating and getting sun exposure and making sure that we don't overburden them. So if we know, like for my kids, the biggest hurdle that we go through is birthday parties, and we'll go to a birthday party, and if we know that they're going to be in the pool dealing with chlorine, if we know that there's going to be a cake that might have sugar and maybe artificial dyes, and maybe there's going to be a whole bunch of kids from her class that I know vaccine on the schedule, I'll have a talk with my daughter beforehand, a week or so, and I'll say, okay, these are the things that might be hard on your body. What are some ways that maybe we can help your body fight this and be able to handle this? And I had great conversations with her, and she's totally against artificial dyes. So she's like, well, let's just bring a snack that I can have instead. And we'll bake cookies together or something. And so she knows that she has this very special treat and she doesn't feel left out. And she actually gets really excited. And she'll even be sitting at the table with the other kids at the birthday party, and she'll be like, that cake still looks really good, but there's artificial dyes and they don't work with my body. And so me and my mommy made these cookies. Would you like one? And sometimes the kids will actually take the cookies over the cake, which I find hilarious. And then we have different things that we will do, like a vitamin C spray before she gets into the pool. And so it's just those little conversations that I can have with her, and to not be in that fear of oh my gosh, I know that child just had their well baby visit. They're probably I'm trying to calculate in my mind, okay, when's the peak shedding window? Which vaccine did they get? You can just spiral. That's my advice. Been there, done that. It's not fun. And so the best thing that you could do is just focus on those basics. There are certain supplements that I will give my children at that beginning of the school year, because I know when we're going to the public library, I know when we're doing things that they're going to be exposed. So there's some certain tinctures that we'll use that will help those detox systems, will help support the liver, things like that, making sure they're hydrated, getting those electrolytes in. So really that's all you can do, in my opinion.
I really, really love that answer, and I wish I had have heard that probably a year ago when I was in the trenches of it. But I'm coming out of it now. But I think there's a lot of people going into the trenches now as they learn vaccines. So a lot of people that are in that community that reach out to me a lot. being able to provide them this podcast for them to go, okay, cool, you're going to become informed. But once you start looking into vaccines, it does become quite overwhelming to what you do discover. I don't think I've ever come across anyone that's actually researched vaccines read inserts and then ever still decided to vaccinate. So it'd be interesting to hear and put it out there to see if anyone does. But in that sense, also being able to have compassion and love and understanding, and when you do learn it, how to not get overwhelmed by it all too much. So what are the most important questions parents should ask their healthcare professional before agreeing to any vaccine?
I think they should ask their provider if they've read the insert. That would be the first part, because they cannot provide that expert experience if they themselves don't even know what's on the insert. Most medical providers that have reached out to me don't even know inserts exist. So I would say it's going to be a high likelihood that they haven't. And you have to be very cautious too, because you don't want to, if you want to have a productive conversation and you want to preserve this relationship with your provider, printing off the insert and shoving it in their face is probably not the best way to go about it. However, you do want to make sure that are maintaining that personal responsibility, personal authority. And so it just really depends on your relationship with your provider and how you want that future relationship to look like, or if you do plan on maybe getting a second opinion or going to a different type of provider. But that would be my question, is have they read the inserts, and what were they concerned about reading on the inserts? Were there any things that apply to your personal situation based on the inserts? And that to me is important, right? Like, it's important to ask that from your provider, but always read the insert yourself. You are one of many patients that the provider has, and there is no way they are going to remember every single aspect of you and your child's health history and your current situation. And so I would always recommend reading that insert. I have just gobs and gobs of stories in my DMs of people telling me, I'm so glad I read the insert because I had a contraindication, which is a medical condition that, according to the CDC and FDA, that can increase your risk to an adverse reaction. And somebody has said, I had a contraindication, it's listed on the insert, my provider recommended this product, whether it be a vaccine or a pharmaceutical prescription, and they still recommended this product. And then I reminded them, oh, I have this medical condition. And they said, oh, that's right. Okay. And then they prescribed something else, or they tried something else. So always read that insert. And I go through step by step in that free training course on my website, justtheinserts.com, and in the book, I provide screenshots. And again, this is for America, but many people have told me they can apply it and it translates to Australia. It teaches you how to find them, how to read them, and then you can make the best decision after reading them. And it's really interesting that you mentioned earlier, most of your friends that have read the inserts have gone forward to decline. And I have noticed that too. However, there are many situations where it's not a medical decision, it's a cultural or relational decision. And that is why I am working incredibly hard to shift that culture, because there are some people in whatever situation they're in, whether with the child's other parent, or maybe they're in a custody battle, or maybe they are a single mom and they are reliant upon an income in a certain state, and they have all these extra situations around them. I want to have that grace and opportunity for them to make those informed decisions, because that must be incredibly hard to be withheld education and employment opportunities based on this singular acceptance of a medical product. I do try to be very extra gracious for those that are in those situations, because it's got to be really, really hard. And that's why I say that's not informed consent, that's medical coercion. And that's why I'm trying to fight that just tooth and nail, trying to work daily on shifting this culture, because it's not okay. It's not okay for somebody to only be accepting a product for that sole reason, in
You're
my
doing an
opinion.
amazing job at that, that's for sure. Incredible
Well,
job.
thank you.
So
That's great feedback.
how do you think parents can prepare for the pushback, not only from schools and hospitals, but also with their family?
That's a great question. I think understanding that you have gone on your research journey and you started with fact A and you went to fact B and you went to fact C all the way to fact Z. And sometimes when you're sharing information with someone and you might start off with fact P or Q, they're going to be very off put depending on where they are in their own research journey. And so maybe having that understanding of that, whenever you share something about the industry or something that might come across as conspiratorial, even if you have the doc of information to back it up, that can be very off-putting to someone. And I say this from experience, right? Because when my mom presented the information to me, it just shut off my brain. My brain could not process it adequately. So in order to have those productive conversations, I would just be very mindful on the information that you share and how you share it and when you share it and the progression of that information. And then learn how they learn. Do they like to listen to a podcast? Do they like to watch a documentary? Do they like to get into the weeds of the research like I needed to? Learn how they learn, and then maybe find something that you think will resonate with them. And then when you present it to them, don't be like, here, educate yourself. That's not going to go well. My advice would be, hey, I listened to this podcast and there were some really interesting things that were talked about. I would love for you to listen to it and then let me know what you think about it, because that communicates to them that it's important to you. It's something that you are taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn about. And also it communicates that you value their input and what they think about it. And so it kind of lowers those barriers a little bit, and it cuts away at some of the thorny conversations that tend to happen around this topic. And so hopefully you can go into it being more open, more honest, and more respectful.
How can then parents navigate the medical system? Because it's a bit easier to deal with your family than it is the medical system without feeling judged or even overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can't speak intelligently on how it is specifically in Australia. In the United States, there it's very, very, very tricky depending on which state you're in, because again, that state mandate dictates insurance, dictates how the medical license and the boards operate and things like that. So it really, like for example, in New York, it's very, very strict. You have to follow a schedule in order for your child to go to daycare, in order for your child to go to school. Most employers require certain vaccines. And so I would say in New York, it's extremely hard for a parent to exercise informed consent, to exercise delaying or declining. And I actually developed a pro-informed consent provider directory. And that's the hardest state that we're dealing with right now, because there are several providers who have said, yes, I will do a medical exemption or I will honor informed consent, and their license have been revoked, and just for giving a medical exemption. So New York is really, really hard to try to find someone. I do have a handful of them that I can reference individually to people, but they do not want to be listed on a public forum. They don't want to have their practice listed because they'll be targeted. When then there's states like I live in Virginia, and in Virginia, it states in our definition of medical neglect for social services, it states that preventative care such as well baby visits and vaccines do not meet the definition of medical neglect. So I have a lot more freedom in Virginia because I know that they can't call Child Protective Services because it doesn't meet that definition of medical neglect. They honor parental choice. They honor informed consent. We have exemptions in our state. So for my oldest that goes to school, all I have to do is print out a form from the Virginia Health Department, and then I have to get it notarized at like a UPS or a mail store or something like that. So it's much easier for me to do that and find a provider who will honor informed consent because they know that they're not going to be targeted. So it just really depends on what state you're in and what the climate is. But I do have a whole host of questions in my book of questions to ask your doctor. I have phone scripts on how to vet providers. So I personally recommend calling around providers instead of going in person or scheduling an appointment. I would recommend asking those questions on the phone before you even schedule, because it's just a lot easier to deal with that rejection or whatever they require in their practice over the phone than in person. There's a lot of psychology to vaccine visits as well that I cite from the studies that have been done, at least for the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is not a government entity. That is a private organization that has lots and lots of resources to increase vaccine acceptance. And so I cite some of those studies as well on different strategies that providers will employ in order to increase vaccine acceptance for the parents that come through. That is a very loaded question, and there's many different answers depending on where you live, but I do have plenty of resources on my website for anyone that wants more applicable information for their situation.
Yeah, well, and if anybody else is left feeling pretty overwhelmed by that, I just always come back to, and you've said this before, is no is a full sentence. But it's
Yes.
just really tricky when you start declining vaccines. It's a bit depending on how you're choosing to live and how you're choosing to educate, and if the daycare and stuff, it can be quite like a big lid to open. Like you're opening a huge can of
Yes.
worms that you then have to look on to deal with, and it is just easier to keep that lid on sometimes. So my next question, though, that this is probably one that sits most closely to my heart as to why I chose to decline. And from your research, have you found a link between childhood vaccines, the schedule, and SIDS, so sudden infant death syndrome?
Unfortunately, yes. It's very shocking to me what I'm about to describe. And just for anybody that had a knee jerk reaction to me saying that, everything I'm about to say is verified from a .gov resource and I have it cited on my website. So I challenge you and I encourage you to go verify everything that I say going forward. So there is a vaccine so earlier I talked about the Tdap vaccine. So that's for pregnant women and I believe children over 10, so adults. And then there's the DTaP vaccine. So that is for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. So for above 10-year-olds adults is the Tdap, starts with a T, and then for younger children it's the DTaP, starts with a D. And then so the DTaP starts with a D for younger children. There are several manufacturers, and one of the manufacturers on their manufacturer insert that's sitting on the FDA website, if you scroll all the way to the adverse reaction section, under the adverse reaction section, and remember, the CDC says that an adverse reaction is an undesirable medical condition known to be caused by a vaccine. So that's the CDC's definition. So everything under the adverse reaction section is known to be caused by a vaccine. In the DTaP manufacturer insert, under the adverse reaction section, sudden infant death syndrome is listed. So that's really concerning that the FDA knows, the manufacturer knows, but most parents aren't taught. I would say all parents are never told that sudden infant death syndrome has been linked to the DTaP vaccine and it's known to be caused. The other concerning thing is DTaP on the American CDC schedule is administered at 2 months old, 4 months old, and 6 month old babies. And according to the National Institutes of Health, the highest rate of SIDS is within that time frame. So here we have a .gov entity saying that the highest rate of SIDS is the same time that the CDC recommends a product that has sudden infant death syndrome listed on the FDA regulated manufacturer insert.
There's just
Yeah.
no words.
I know. It's heartbreaking. And it's one of those things that when I start talking with someone and they share kind of like a polished public health narrative that says SIDS is not linked to vaccines, and then I share all of this, and there are these mental gymnastics that then they go through, and then I say, no, based on all of these .gov verifiable resources, A plus B and A plus B equals C, C plus B equals, or the logic through it, you go through the whole logic of it, and it's still, there are some people that have such a thick cognitive dissonance and they cannot accept what our own government manufacturers say about these products. And that's frustrating. It's so frustrating because as a business person, if there's any product on the market, like replace the vaccine with a boppy or a bassinet or a type of sleeper or something like that. If you had all of this verifiable information about that one product, it'd be pulled. There would be recalls. There'd be news articles. It would be shouting from the mountaintop. Every single birth worker, every single pediatrician would tell their patients, hey, this has now been linked to SIDS. We're going to pull it off the market. Make sure you destroy anything that you might be in your house. And yet here we have a product that not only is recommended, it's mandated in some states. And so it's really, really hard to realize that. And I think once people do, that is what creates this hunger for them to research all the other products on the market and to research, okay, if this is something that is not even going down a conspiratorial rabbit hole, what else is there? And what else on the market is there that I need to start looking more into? And unfortunately, most parents think that they're getting that informed consent because in America we have vaccine information statements. They're called VIS, and it's typically a one-page sheet about the vaccine, but it's a very, very high level. And so on the very, very bottom of this vaccine information statement for the DTaP vaccine, it says that it could, in rare cases, it could cause serious injury or death. But if sudden infant death syndrome was listed on there, more parents would pause and ask for more information. And I've had some people that have said, well, why was this added? What are all the specific cases on this? And unfortunately, we don't have that transparency. The manufacturer doesn't go in more depth about it. All we know is what the government and the manufacturers provided. And we need to demand that transparency from them. We need to have a higher threshold of understanding from these regulatory bodies on the products that are on the market that are given to our infants. So it's a little bit of responsibility on the government, but also we are the ones that hold our governments responsible, and we need to be advocating for that responsibility, for that transparency.
How do you think that so many cases of SIDS, when the autopsies are happening, that they're saying that they have no idea where it's coming from? How is this going undetected? How the nurses and the direct people that, how are they not seeing the correlation?
Well, a lot of it, you'll see like those mental gymnastics that I was talking about. A lot of them will say, well, there's no way that we could say that this child would have died from SIDS if the vaccine had been administered or not. There's correlation doesn't equal causation, and there's no way that we can nail it down. And for many of the medical providers that have reached out to me, they are taught in some cases it's an impossibility for there to be an adverse reaction to a vaccine. And so it doesn't even cross their mind. Unfortunately, many of the people that have reached out to me that have started to make those connections are the first responders, are the ones that are putting the child in the ambulance. And so they're the ones that some of them will ask, they'll say, was the child up to date on vaccines? And it gives me chills just saying it, but I've had several first responders say that the parents will be like, yeah, we had our vaccines earlier today or earlier this week. Why do you ask? And it's just it's just one of those things where we know from our government that there's correlation, and yet these parents are stuck. They're not giving that information that they deserve. And that's why I created Just the Inserts, is because you should know what the government says about their own products, or the manufacturers say at their own products. If this is sitting on an FDA website, you should know that. And you should be aware of it. And I've had people that have read the insert ended up in whatever situation that they were because maybe the child's other parent really wanted, the DTaP vaccine, or whatever situation that they're in, they ended up accepting it. And then they slept with their child, and thank goodness they did, because at some point their child stopped breathing and they were able to seek immediate medical attention. And who would have known if they had not done that? And so that's why it's just completely mind-boggling to me for somebody to advocate for a parent not to have that informed consent, not to have that insert, because if we know that there's a connection, you need to be telling the parents this. They need to be able to have that alertness if they do accept it, so then they can change different things in their lives, whatever they're doing, to make sure that they are alert to the potential early warning signs. And sometimes there's not warning signs. Sometimes there is no path for a parent to take to be able to try to seek that immediate medical attention. And again, that's something that the parent should know in advance so that they can make that more informed decision. And what most parents, and this is the most heartbreaking part, what most parents don't know is in the mechanism of action section of the DTaP vaccine, it is stated that the metric to define immunity to pertussis is unknown. So yes, we have some studies that might say that yes, there could be some protection from DTaP vaccine, but it is not 100%. Science is not 100% sure on that because there's no metric to define immunity to pertussis. And that's heartbreaking, because here you're told that you need to accept this product to prevent this disease, and yet if you read the manufacturer insert, it's still not even 100% effective.
Lots of emotions are coming up for me as I listen to you. Obviously, the first is just immense sadness and a lot of anger that I feel like ever since I've started going down this, and I know you're going to be able to resonate, is that it can become really quite hard to go back out into society knowing what you know, but yet feeling like you can't share it. Like, I have plenty of friends who vaccinate their children and I love their kids very much. And yet I do not want them to feel as if I'm judging them, or I don't want to risk my losing my friendship with them in bringing this. I share it on social because then I'm like, well, you can choose to watch what I have to say or not. That's up to you. But I would never bring it up in person about what they're doing. But it scares me and it's scary and really upsetting. And I think for me, I've really struggled to go back into society and continue living life as normal once I've found this out. I feel like I'm getting back better now. Like you said, you went through your shedding and then you just realize you have to just be joyful and happy. And I do feel like anyone who's really new to this, because even for me, I've been on this journey for 3 years now and I'm still feeling the emotions right now listening to you. So I can't imagine how someone very new to this is going to be thinking and feeling, because it's confusing. You're like, well, why is this not on media? Why isn't this? If you haven't gathered yet that it's so much deeper than that. This runs a lot deeper than just if it's not on the news, it's not real, like, or it's a conspiracy. If it's not getting fed to us on mainstream media and news and TV, then it mustn't be real, because a lot of people do find that they have to, that's how they seek truth if what's really going on in the world, which just isn't the case whatsoever. What's going on in the world is a lot darker than what we realize. And I'm really trying to learn how to navigate being fear-led and how to correctly use my voice as well as you do. You use your voice incredibly beautifully, where I'm still trying to learn how to navigate how to use my voice about this issue in the correct way. But this leads me to a realization that I had with my own daughter. So when she was born at 36 weeks. She was only 2.5 kilos. So I'm not sure if you know the metrics for that, but she was a small little baby. And when she was born, she was recommended Hep B and vitamin K. Now, one of the realizations I have, I'm not going to go too much into this because I'm trying to talk as quick as I can now, because I've got a lot of things to cover with you in such a short time. But one of the things I realized is that a vaccine, so I'm not going to remember the milligrams off the top of my head, but I think when I looked into this, and this was 3 years ago, it was like 12 point something mils or something inside the vitamin K vaccine. And my daughter was a 2.5 kilo baby. And now one of the things that I intuitively wondered, I was like, well, if a baby's born at 5 kgs, which is double the size of a baby born at 2.5 kgs, why is the same amount of the dosage administered? And then my daughter actually, after having the vitamin K, so I did decline, but they did tell me that she had bleeding on her brain, which she didn't have. It was, I then went on to learn that were, they do have their things they tell you. And when you've just given birth, you're not in the correct space to be able to advocate and fight. You are very vulnerable and very open. And so, of course, when they told me that she had bleeding on her brain, I was going to accept, and I accepted. And then she went on to have severe jaundice, which led us to being in hospital for an extra 5 days. When I went on to read the insert on the vitamin K, jaundice is actually a linked reaction. And I intuitively felt that instantly when she went on to have jaundice, and I brought it up with the nurse, and the nurse looked at me like I was crazy. And so I just completely shut down. I was holding my now jaundiced baby, who I knew had a reaction to that vitamin K because she was a tiny baby, given the same amount of dosage that a five double the size baby would be given. And now all of us know, if we give our babies Panadol or any other pharmaceutical drug that is recommended, it looks at the body weight of the size of the baby and how much you should have. So that was my first alarm bell. So that was a tangent I went on that wasn't at all scripted. I just
Those are the best kinds.
oh goodness, it just weighed on me heavy. I do feel I'm quite an outspoken individual. Do have a lot of confidence in speaking my truth and stepping up to what isn't right and what's wrong. And in that moment, I was intimidated. I was shut down. So I can't imagine all of my friends. The majority of my friends are more, perhaps a bit more shyer. And so I cannot see how they could even decline. I acknowledge how hard it would be to decline and stay when they're telling you the worst case scenario. Even when I was pregnant with my daughter, when I declined some things in as well. I was told I was going to have a stillborn, in which I then went on to file a complaint with the consumer, which I forgot the name of it now, but anyone does want the details, I'll be able to find them for you, because but that is the norm. Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to
No,
find
it's
how I
okay.
get ourselves back now. So,
No, well, and I do want to say, just take a moment. It's really, really hard to go through something like that and then share it after the fact, because then it opens you up, that vulnerability opens you up to so many different critiques and things. And I just want to say, if anybody's listening right now and they think, oh, well, that couldn't have happened. Yes, it does. I have thousands of people over the last few years of very similar stories. You are not alone. And I'm so sorry that happened to you, because it's not okay. And that is why we need to shift this culture, because there are so many of people like us that have been adult, we're in the crosshairs of healthcare providers that aren't taught medical inserts or taught manufacturer inserts, and they think it's an impossibility, like that nurse that looked at you that like you were crazy. And then the patient is the one that's shouldering that burden of their ignorance, and yet it's verifiable from .gov resources. And so it makes you feel like you're crazy, but you're not alone. There are so many of us that have gone down this path. I've shared my story. My daughter was injured by the synthetic vitamin K injection as well. She had that severe jaundice, she had eczema, she had just liver issues, gut issues, the whole thing. She was colic. And it's so hard when you are trying to advocate for your child and you're constantly being shunned or shamed or judged by the experts that you're seeking help from, and the ones that should be providing that expertise and that knowledge, and that they're the ones that are giving you sometimes the hardest time. And so it can be really, really hard to navigate that. I personally believe that your misery becomes your ministry, and that is why I started Just the Inserts and why I continue to do it, because I encounter other people that have had similar stories to me, and why I just advocate for that informed consent. Because if you would have had that informed consent up front, then you could have made a decision for your child. And there are certain inserts now that are starting to slowly be updated. I believe it's the hepatitis vaccine off the top of my head, where it states if a baby is under a certain weight that it should not be administered. And now the vitamin K injection, which is technically not a vaccine, it's considered a drug in the States, but we sometimes it's called a vaccine because it's an injection. It says now that all neonates, so all babies, need to have the preservative free version, because that benzyl alcohol that's in the preservative version leads to gasping syndrome in babies. And so it's just really important to read those inserts, to know this, because your healthcare providers aren't reading it. We know that. And for you to be a patient, you need to be informed. You need to understand what you're reading, and you need to advocate for yourself. And so for those that have been in those situations, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I do believe that there's a reason that we've gone through it, and now that we're talking and having this community with each other to change it and to shift that culture, and to ensure that our daughters don't have to fight this when they become mothers, and all the other mothers that are coming behind us don't have to deal with this. And I think that it is something like you seem that you have been emboldened to make that change within your circle of influence. And it can be really hard because you don't want to lose that friendship. I still struggle with it as well, even with the years of experience and over 10,000 of hours researching these products and industry. I myself still struggle with sharing this information with people in real life, because it can be really hard. You don't want to have that rejection. You don't want to come across as being a know-it-all or anything like that. And so I try to do it very prayerfully. I tried to do it from a sense of remembering how I felt when I was first presented the information, and again, just trying to maybe see how they learn. I shared this story on Instagram in my stories. I haven't talked about it like on a podcast before yet, but there was a situation in my church. It used to be called MOPS, Moms of Preschoolers. Now it's called MomCo, but it's basically moms of young children get together every few times a month, and we just come together, and sometimes we have a speaker. So recently, like we had a pelvic floor therapist come. Sometimes we have if you early warning signs of postpartum depression, we have all these different types of speakers that come in, and we do just some friendship building activities. Sometimes we'll do crafts. I'm not a crafty person, but sometimes we'll do crafts or different things. We'll break bread with each other and just like share the burdens that we're going through. And this one time, one of the women at my table was saying that she had a well baby visit the next day for one of her newborn. I believe her son was 2 months old. And I, even with everything that I know, I could not figure out how to verbalize what I know. And I have all of these resources and I still couldn't, like, my words could not come out. And I just stumbled and all I could do was pray. That's all I could do was think about, I'm just going to pray. And her son was sleeping next to me in the stroller. And without her looking, I just like reached my hand out. I didn't touch the baby, but I like just reached my hand out and prayed for the baby. And when I got in my car, I just prayed for her. And I knew that her appointment was 9 o'clock the next day. And so I put a calendar on my phone and I just prayed for her. And I'm getting chills as I talk about it because at 9:45, she sent me a text and she had no idea. I didn't say a word about anything that I was doing. All I did was pray for her and her son. At 9:45 the next morning, she sent me a text and she said, "I just had a horrible experience with my pediatrician. I know that you have some kind of organization that you do where you talk about vaccines. Can you send me the link?" And all I had done was pray. I had not said a word. And she had on her own texted me and we had a great conversation and she was able to decide what she wanted to do for her child because her older child had had some adverse reactions to vaccines prior and she had gotten some medical bullying in that appointment. And so I was able to help her deal with that. And sometimes it's just being available and knowing that you can be that resource for other people and not maybe even like taking every single opportunity to like push that onto people, but just know that if anybody does have any questions, if they do kind of had that experience that rubs them the wrong way and makes them start to question a little bit more, just knowing that you could be a resource for them and that you'll be a loving and respectful space for them to explore this is so powerful. That was such an important lesson. And then if you do have that faith, the prayer is so important too, just for whatever you decide how you want to share the information to ensure that you're not doing it in a hostile manner. My personal way of approaching things throughout my entire life has been more of like a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. And so I have to be very mindful on how I kind of approach conversations. And I actually think that it worked out the way it did because now I know what it's like to be gavelled. I know what it's like to have that information just waterboarded on you. And so I'm very, very observant to that fact. And so whenever I do share the information, I have a little bit more calmness about my demeanor because I know what it feels like on the other end.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there too.
It's hard. It's very, very
Yeah.
hard.
It's really, really hard. So vaccines are supposed to undergo years worth of safety testing. I'm just trying to think of all the things that the everyday people are coming up as their defense mechanism, right? That vaccines undergo years worth of safety testing. What do you think the public misunderstands about the clinical trials and the safety of vaccines?
Well, the first thing is the placebo in those clinical trials. Whenever we think of a placebo, we think about a sugar pill or a saline injection. Unfortunately, pretty much all the vaccines on the market have used a different vaccine or the same vaccine at a later date as the placebo. And so as a consumer, we have concerns because you would think that a clinical trial would be an inert placebo. They might say placebo, but it's not the same definition as what you would see in other, like, so for pharmaceutical, another prescription, their placebo might be that sugar pill or saline injection. But for vaccines, for some reason, when you say placebo, it could be like that same vaccine without one of the antigens, or it could be without the aluminum or some other ingredient that's not in it, but it's still the vaccine. It's not inert. So that's important to realize. And then also there's a phenomenon called healthy patient bias. And so most clinical trials do not have pediatric patients or pregnant individuals, pregnant women. And so when you have a new product on the market, like say for the RSV vaccines, you're not going to have that data from pregnant women unless they do a pregnant women study, which they ended up doing. And in that study, they found out that the women that accepted it were at higher risk of preterm labor. So it's important to understand most products on the market, you need to ensure that you understand what are the clinical trials that brought that product to market. And if your condition or your population was excluded, because that will alter how you understand the safety and effectiveness of that product.
Another argument is vaccines provide herd immunity. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, the biggest sections that I would point people to is the shedding section, because if you take a product and it sheds the virus, most of the live virus vaccines are, you're not supposed to take them around immunocompromised individuals. Pregnant women aren't supposed to be around recently vaccinated MMR vaccines because of that rubella. If the woman is exposed to rubella virus while pregnant, that can lead to complications for the child and potentially fatal adverse reactions. So, and then also the limitations of effectiveness sections in most vaccines, they're not very robust. They might just say not everyone who accepts this vaccine is protected. And so if you're accepting a product to create herd immunity and then it doesn't work, then you're not protecting the herd. And so I would encourage anybody that kind of is getting a product for herd immunity to understand the limitations of that product from the manufacturer. And then to realize as well that accepting a product for kind of that public health or population level reason, that can be a very slippery slope. And it's important for you to make sure that you do that very, very carefully and very mindfully. I actually have a podcast episode that talks about who are you making decisions for? Are you making it for yourself and your family? Or are you making it because you feel like you're being coerced by society and you're told that you're presented this false dichotomy that in order for you to be a good citizen that you have to accept that product. We don't really want to set that precedent because that product, that vaccine can be replaced with anything. It could be replaced with sterilization. It could be replaced with so many other things. So just really understand who are you making these medical decisions for and why are you doing them? Understanding like the actual intention of why you're doing it is very, very helpful because then you can figure out what you need to research to get that informed consent.
When I first started to think about declining my daughter's 6-week vaccine, that was just the first one. I was just doing kind of like one at a time. I just would think about my best friend and I'm like, oh my goodness, what is she going to think? Oh, is she going to want to, is she going to think I'm crazy? And I think like so many people are thinking about their parents. Like if, I feel like this generation, like my generation are a lot open-minded and they are doing anything to raise healthy kids. But a lot of people, that if they have a close relationship with their parents and they've heard their parents bag out people as, quote unquote
Yep.
anti-vaxxers, they then instantly go, well, I can't question it because then my parents aren't going to support me or potentially love me, or what are they going to think of me? So then we go on to do what our gut or what our research says to us we should perhaps look into and change and not do based on our relationship with people in our life. So
Yeah,
that is
well,
definitely something.
before we move on, you just sparked a memory in my mind. When I was first starting to ask my friends, when I was first starting to ask about vaccines, I remember there was this other woman that was pregnant at the same time I was, and I remember we were getting together for brunch and we were just talking about, I can't even remember what we were talking about. And I was starting to lean towards potentially not accepting. I had already declined the Tdap vaccine, but I was potentially not going to accept the Hep B at birth, but I wasn't 100% sure. And I remember her saying, and I can still vividly know exactly what she looked like and what she was eating. I remember her saying, I think we just need to collect all of the anti-vaxxers on an island and nuke it. And that's what she said. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, she is such a kind and like a very mild mannered person. And yet she said that. And it was just so shocking to me that this would elicit such a powerful and strong statement out of someone who is very, very kind and very compassionate and very loving for anything else that we're talking about. And it just really made me realize how polarizing it was. But again, like you said, we've got to be able to make those decisions for ourselves because our friends, our family members, our pediatricians, they're not responsible for any potential adverse reactions complications. They're not responsible for any disease complications or anything like that. We are for our children. We're stewards of our bodies. We're stewards of our children's bodies. And so we do have to kind of create that boundary in our mind and let it go and just like kind of let it float off and not be a part of our decision making process, because that is just a really unhealthy precedent to set for any decision that you make as a parent going forward. But it's hard. I've been there. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, what brings me back is always just looking at my child and their eyes are looking back at me. They're looking back at you, only you. You have to make your decisions based solely for them, and you have to really try to remove your relationship with anybody else because really they're the only people that really matter
Yeah.
making decisions for. I think you've kind of answered this already, but I'll see if you can touch on it. Because RF is anyone who else is I'm not really into politics, but I have become since following along RFK Jr.'s journey with the Maha movement under Trump. He recently launched a major investigation into the links between vaccines and autism, something mainstream science has largely dismissed for years. From your own research and experience, do you think he's going to find a link?
So I have mixed emotions about it. I don't know if they should have done a timeline to it, because that's nothing else in science. You can't really do. I think it's more of like a checkpoint, but it definitely was kind of misunderstood by at least mainstream media in the United States. So, but I do think it's important. Like, you want to have those SMART goals, you want to have those time-based goals, and because if not, then it would have been 4 years have passed and nothing would have happened. So I think that was the intention behind it. I do personally, this is my personal opinion based on my research and what I've done and all I've read, I do think there is a contributing factor based when we talk about encephalitis, the autoimmune conditions that are known to be caused by certain vaccines that are listed, and again, that aluminum and all the research that I have cited about that. I do think it's a contributing factor. However, I do know unvaccinated children that do have severe autism. And so I don't think it's the only thing, in my opinion. I think that there are many different things that are contributing to it. But I am very interested in what is going to be presented and hopefully what will inspire some further research into all these different things. I 100% want aluminum to be researched a lot more in depth. I shared everything that I found in the book, and even though there is a lot of it, it's not as robust as it should be. So I would like to see more funding directed to that.
Incredible. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I do have so many more questions I do want to ask you. But for those who haven't listened, you recently did an interview with our former infectious disease scientist, Elizabeth, who left the industry due to ethical concerns of the vaccine developments. What stood out to you most from that conversation?
So she went in depth about aborted fetal cell or fetal tissue and then embryonic stem cells and how they're used in the development of testing and development of vaccines and other pharmaceuticals. And I was just completely floored with when we're talking about aborted fetal cells for vaccines, we're consistently told that it was just an abortion that happened in the 1960s. And we're kind of this perception that it was an abortion that was already going to happen and they just took the tissues from that abortion, after the fact. And it's actually not that at all. And if you listen to that episode, it's quite alarming, just the practice of the way that it's created, these cell lines are created, and how that's still going on today. And that's actually something that Elizabeth and I are working very hard on. We're going to create a website on how to research all of this, because there isn't a singular source that you can go to for the fetal cell lines and embryonic cell lines. Most of the resources out there right now are just the fetal cell lines. And so she takes it in also from those embryonic stem cell lines, because that's a growing industry with IVF. And she is going through and collecting all of those research papers, all of those resources, so we can just put it into one website so you can go and research it and it be, translated into lay terms so you can understand, okay, if I go to accept this product and I have a moral or religious standard against using fetal cells or embryonic stem cells, these are the products that have been used in testing and manufacturing. So then you can make that informed decision. And then also it'll break down how that process happens, and everything will be cited as much as possible, because there is some aspects of the industry that are proprietary and are not easily accessible to be verified. And that's why it was important, her perspective on things, because she used to work with vaccines. She used to go to the freezer and get the aborted fetus cells from the freezer and test vaccines. So she has that intimacy with the industry. So yeah, if you haven't yet, that was an incredible conversation to listen to. And I'm very excited going forward what she's going to be creating and making that resource a lot more attainable for the everyday person to understand that it is still going on today. And there's a lot I could say about it, but I do have to go soon because I have to pick up my daughter from school. I wish we had so much more time to talk about it, but yes, that's a really great episode to listen to.
I saw you recently shared that you often can feel like giving up on sharing this message because of the backlash, the criticism, the death threats you've even received, and it just can get too much. So I just wanted to thank you personally for your strength, resilience, and perseverance. Myself and so many of my friends in my community have declined vaccines confidently based on the information that you have shared. And so what can people do now that they've listened to this? Where can they go forward to find their own research from what you have provided everybody?
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I do get a lot of heated messages, so it's nice to have the balance of the positive feedback. Everything is at justtheinserts.com. I have a free training course there that you can go through. If you are interested in the book, but you want to read the first chapter for free, I have a sign up. If you just scroll down, there's a little section that says read the chapter for free. And then I have my podcast as well considered on Apple and Spotify that, oh man, there's some really, really great interviews that are getting ready to come out. So that's really helpful. And then I have all of my pharmaceutical deep dives. I don't cover just vaccines. I cover plenty of other products on the market. Yeah, everything's at justtheinserts.com. And then on X and Instagram at justtheinserts.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.